morning, this beautiful Friday. It's cold in the city, and right here at the Morning Momentum, we are here to keep you on toes, to keep you on check with the top stories making the headlines. This Friday morning, we are going to take a look at the top stories inside the Daily Nation and the Standard newspaper. As usual, this is a daily compendium of local and international news, human interest stories, current affairs, and expert opinion. My name is Alfonsoh. That said, let's delve into the Daily Nation. The month of double pain. Kenya Revenue Authority updates systems to reflect taxes backdated to July 1st. Now, the Kenyans will have to dig deeper into their pockets in August as the taxman moves to recover new taxes not deducted in July because of a court order that has since been lifted. The expected double taxation will coincide with the third term school fees due month end, adding a further strain on incomes for households already struggling with rising living costs. That story is beefed up for you on page 7 of the Daily Nation this morning. Also on page 4, Raila team demands crisis talks to begin on Monday. Leader of Azimio's delegation, Kalonzo Musyoka, says time is of essence and the mediation must be concluded by end of the month. The opposition also declares the government cannot unilaterally dictate the agenda of the negotiations that led to the suspension of mass action. Yeah, that story is on page 4. Also, UON Vice Chancellor takes leave over feud, intrigues behind Professor Stephen Kiama's 6-month sabbatical as Professor Julius Ongengo named Activity Vice Chancellor by the University of Nairobi's Council. That story is beefed up for you on page 8. Also, 45,000 village elders set for plum allowance. Interior Cabinet Secretary Kithure Kindiki tells MPs who want elders paid 7,000 shillings monthly that for starters, the state will pay them an allowance as a clear compensation structure is worked out. Let's now take a look at the top stories inside the Daily Nation. WorldCoin officials quizzed in cryptocurrency backlash. The state has raised concerns over the legality and safety of firms' activities. Local staff of global tech company were questioned by the DCI detectives. That story is beefed up for you on page 2 of the Daily Nation this morning. On page 3, court awards ex-soldier 2 million shillings for illegal sacking. Mugure was fired by KDF soon after he was charged with the murder of his wife and children. Judge declined to order his reinstatement, terming it impracticable. That story is on page 3 this morning. Let's take a look at page 4. Kalonzo wants talks to start Monday, stick to 30-day deadline. Discussions are meant to unlock an impasse airing from protesters over high cost of living and disputed polls. The Wiper Party leader, in a letter to his Kenya Kwanza Alliance counterpart Kimani Ichung'wah, said time was of the essence. We can catch up with that story on page 4 and get time to go through it on page 5. Kenya to play up climate change and development link at summit. Africa leaders to use summit to come up with common stand on climate change. Environment CS asks global leaders to focus on climate change pain points. That story is on page 5. Shifting gears to page 6, women in Nyanza Coast Western to get 1 billion funding to boost fisheries. Women comprises of 60% of the labor force in the fisheries sector, minister says. Counties targeted are Kilifi, Kwale, Lamu, Mombasa, Taita Taveta, Tana River, Homa Bay, Kisumu, Siaya, Busia, and Migori counties. You can catch up with that story on page 6. On page 7, the month of pain, employees to be hit as new taxes backdated. The implementation of housing tax and new income tax rates backdated to July 1st after Finance Act suspension was lifted. Kenyans are set to be beleaguered by high deductions from earnings, higher fees for secondary schools, universities, among others. That story, you can catch up with it on page 7. In numbers, 1.5% housing tax rate to be charged on an employee's gross salary and matched by employer. On the other end, 7.3% cost of living is this much higher compared to the same period last year, according to Kenya National Bureau of Statistics. Yeah, that is a top story on page 7 of the Daily Nation this morning. On page 8, leadership wrangles behind Professor Kiama's decision to take leave. University Council appoints Professor Ongengo in acting capacity. You can catch up with that story on page 8. Let's take a look at page 10. Konza Techno City gets 100 billion shillings boost as Ruto unveils Open Varsity. Open University of Kenya, which received its charter yesterday, will start operations in September. Dual carriageway to be built from Machakos turnoff to Emali town to enhance accessibility to the Techno City. That story is briefed up for you on page 10. Let's take a look at page 12. Farmers jittery over plans to import maize from East African community. Now, the government is under pressure to lower the cost of living, and farmers don't want market forces of supply and demand to determine maize prices. That story is briefed up for you on page 12 of the Daily Nation this morning. On page 14, more ammunition in the war against malaria as MKU unveils brand new research laboratory. Meanwhile, the university has recently signed more partnerships to give nursing and other students access to enhanced training and work exposure abroad. New developments as Mount Kenya University holds 23rd graduation ceremony today. We can catch up with that story on page 14 and page 15 of the Daily Nation this morning. Let's take a look at the expert opinion, why poverty, not fossil fuel, is the biggest threat to climate in Africa. We are being rushed into a fossil fuel clean energy transition by climate activists, since clean energy has little or no greenhouse gases, reduces carbon dioxide, and mitigates climate change. Now, Kiraitu Murungi says we should use all the natural resources available to us. Another expert opinion story right here, change tack on Al-Shabaab. Despite government efforts to fight Al-Shabaab, its attacks have escalated with many deaths and serious injuries, especially in northeastern counties of Mandera, Garissa, and Wajir, and Lamu in the coast region. You can catch up with that story on page 17 of the Daily Nation this morning. On page 19, Indangasi article about Maisea Mugo should have been spiked. The anger was all over social media and in private conversations. That story is on page 19. Let's move on to some other stories inside the Daily Nation this morning, and that should be business news. But before that, let's take a look at county news. Now, Homa Bay activists call for change in uniforms for enforcement department. That story on page 22. In Nairobi County, governor formed team to probe pending legal fees worth 21 billion Kenya shillings. County departments trade blame on 1.4 billion shillings legal fees. In Uasin Gishu County, MPs want Rivertex accredited for AGOA to grow sales. That story is on page 21. On page 22, in Homa Bay County, activists call for change in uniforms for enforcement department. An NGO wants the county government to change the uniforms of its enforcement officers, which it insists look like that of the National Police Service. In Lamu County, Shela's cultural values live on despite flood of tourists. Revelers are allowed to enjoy themselves, but under strict rules. In Coast Region, Ruto directive clears way for talks On port revenue, also MPs raise concern over state of hospital that is still in Mombasa County. In Nakuru County set to digitize building plan approval. In Samburu County, boy shot in the head as bandits hit market. Yeah, that is the end of the county news this morning. Let's now shift gears to international news. Military intervention in Niger, the last resort. Former Nigerian head Abdul Salami Abubakar lands in Niamey. Workers repair a railway line in the aftermath of the flooding in Beijing. You can catch up with that story on page 24. Another top story, African Union and United Nations step up bid to boost peace in Somalia. The African Union and the United Nations missions in Somalia have reaffirmed their support for the country's state building, the AU said on Wednesday. You can catch up with that story on page 24. On page 25, Trump legal bills emptying 2024 poll campaign coffers. Former American president has a wide berth to spend vast sums on lawyers. His various political operations have around $32 million in the bank. Also, 44 killed in week of police operation. 9 people were killed in a police operation targeting criminal gangs in Rio de Janeiro on Wednesday, the latest in a week of raids that have left at least 44 dead across Brazil. That story is briefed up for you on page 25. Let's take a look at business news inside the Daily Nation this morning. Microsoft loses phones claim versus ex-MP firm. Now, court rules that there is not evidence of suffering on company. Tech company fails in bid to pursue more than 535 million shillings in supply deal. You can catch up with that story on page 26. In numbers, 60,000 number of phones that were to be supplied by Microsoft. Let's now take a look at sports news inside the Daily Nation this morning. And we start with athletics. Young Kipkirui relishes big Budapest challenge. Teenager thrown in deep end at World Championships. Ismail Kipkirui was going about his usual routine in school when he received unexpected news. You can catch up with that story on page 36. Also, motorsport, only 15 entries for Eldoret Rally. Only 15 cars have registered for the Eldoret Rally set for this weekend. The number of drivers registering for the Kenya National Rally Championship Series events has been going down over the season, which is now a major cause for concern for the stakeholders. You can catch up with that story on page 36. On page 37, corporate events dominate weekend. Now, PAR 73 Ruiru Sports Club course is the venue for the inaugural Dawn to Glow tournament. You can catch up with that story on page 37. Also, Coast Ladies Open, Tanzania's Olomi top as action shifts to Malindi. Tanzania's leading player Neema Olomi showed her Kenyan hosts dust during the third leg of this year's Ladies Coast Open at the Nyali Golf and Country Club's PAR 71 course on Wednesday. On the cover page of the Daily Nation, Kindiki, village elders to get stipend as we plan on salary. Village elders have been working without receiving any pay. Interior CS says the government is working on entrenching the village elder role in law. 1,000 shillings is the amount Interior Ministry is proposing to pay a village elder for every official meeting attended. You can catch up with that story on the cover page of the Daily Nation. Let's take a quick break and then we come back with the top stories inside the Standard. Don't go away because the best is yet to come. to the morning momentum. I am still your host with the most, Alfonsoh. Let's take a look at the standard. The elephant in the room revealed. The deal CSS signed. Now, social contract. The year-long covenant is a tale of ambition, promise and commitment to Kenya Kwanza manifesto, and to underscore its seriousness, President Ruto personally signed against each of his 22 CSS pledges. It is another hot air. Is this another hot air, or will it count this time round? That story is beefed up for you on page 2, 3, and 4. Now, there are some of the key ministries featured right here on the cover page. You'll take a look at that when you grab your copy of the Standard this morning. On page 6, Ruto heads to Central amid jitters on talks. Also on national news, still on page 7, Chief of Staff warns crooks using his name, and also varsity slots, joy for top students. That story is on page 10. Now let's take a look at the top stories inside the Standard. The plan, Ruto's candid talk and a covenant. Now, each minister to be held accountable on lofty development targets. They also agreed on a transparent allocation of funds to all projects. That story is beefed up for you on page 3 and page 2. Now, in 13 million, provide capitation grants within 7 days of exchequer release to 13 million learners. That is under Ministry of Education. Now, those are the key areas cutting across all ministries. There is the Ministry of Education, the Treasury, Ministry of Transport, Ministry of Energy and Petroleum, and Ministry of Agriculture. The whole breakdown is on page 2 and page 3. On page 4, Treasury CS to lose job if cost of living stays high. Ruto administration under pressure to bring down the cost of living and create jobs. Some proposed tax and policy measures have been questioned by interest groups, which stoked social tensions. That story is beefed up for you on page 4. On page 6, Ruto heads to Central amid jitters over proposed dialogue with Raila. Mount Kenya leaders fear that a Ruto-Raila political deal will lead to sidelining of Gachagua. But Ichung'wa dismisses talk of jitters, saying Ruto will be on development tour. That story is beefed up for you on page 6. On page 7, criminals using my name to get money from state offices. That is COSK. There is a call to report individuals who invoke COSK's name to seek favors. The revelations come as Kenya Kwanza is accused of not dealing with corruption. On page 8, court freezes ex-county officials account over 65 million shillings graft. Official is said to have siphoned money from Kisii County officers. Money is said to have been moved from a KCB bank account to a Stima Sacco bank account. Also on page 8, still, state ordered to pay family of demo victim 2 million shillings. The Court of Appeal has awarded the family of a man killed during demonstrations 2 million shillings. While awarding the compensation, the appellate court in Kisumu characterized the average and armed demonstrator as a fly and that the Constitution should guard against excesses of armed police. Let's take a look at page 10. Dreams come true for top students as state honors course choices. Top achievers secure highly sought after courses, and most students with A's wanted to pursue courses in medicine and law. Let's take a look at page 12. MKU unveils new cutting-edge lab for malaria research in Thika. And the war against malaria has received a major boost after Mount Kenya University launched a 300 million lab at its main campus in Thika. That story is beefed up for you on page 12 and page 13. In expert opinion matters, are you happy with membership of talks teams? Now, Zipporah Kering, MP Iala, says yes, they are all experienced leaders And on the contrary, Peter Mutuku says hardliners will derail process, so he's against that opinion. Also on page 16, let's rethink national cohesion strategies and inclusivity laws. The Parliamentary Committee on National Cohesion and Equal Opportunity recently released a report which showed that staffing in state agencies is skewed in favor of the large ethnic communities. The Reader's Corner: lax enforcement of data protection regulations puts internet users at risk of cyber criminals. That story is beefed up for you on page 17. Moving on swiftly, we take a look at some other stories for the Pulse lovers. The article is in today's Standard newspaper. You can take a look at that later on. Now, let's move on to some other stories. Win for Kenya Railways as land lease cancelled. Judge rules that the transfers of ownership were fraudulent. And land in the Eldoret town has hosted a petrol station since 1996. That story is beefed up for you on page 20. In Busia County, forged documents lead cross-border crimes, says PS Omolo. About 40% of cross-border crimes at Luakaka along Kenya-Uganda border involve forged documents, the government has said. Now, let's look at business news inside the Standard this morning. Low cost of airline gets new bird. Low-cost carrier Jambojet has acquired a new plane, growing its fleet to 8. Jambojet Chief Executive Karanja Ndegwa said the new aircraft will address the growing market needs, allowing the carrier to add frequencies on some of its routes. Also, another business news: political unrest, weak shilling dampen companies' output. Stanbic Bank survey shows output and sales declined by the biggest margin in July. Dip in performance also resulted in lower hiring as firms dimmed their outlook. That story is on page 23. On page 25, court holds probe on Mumia's sugar leasing deal. Judge holds investigation or arrest of West Kenya Sugar Company boss. Also appoints new administrator after lapse of the current term. That story is on page 25. Let's take a look at sports news inside the Standard this morning. Now, it's all about rugby. Cabra's Sugar seeded top as Prince Lou Sevens kicks off today. Action starts with the age grade championships this morning. Cabras have been grouped with Homeboys as local rivals Nakuru, and Oilers placed in same pool. Still, Nakuru club ready to host rugby fans. SportPesa has reaffirmed its commitment to supporting the local rugby sports development with a further 1 million shilling sponsorship that goes into supporting the third tournament of this year's SportPesa National Sevens circuit. Also, football now. What records can Haaland break this new season? Manchester City striker broke most records in his first season. He featured in 82% of the minutes of City's 2022-2023 league campaign, compared with 99% for Kane and Salah. You can catch up with that story on page 33. On page 34, football. Who will be the last man standing in football contest? These are high school games. Agoro Sare believe they can shock the nation ahead of their debut in Kakamega. With the national champions Ebwali out, new kings will be crowned in this year's games. Those high school sports are on page 34 and page 35. You can catch up with them inside the Standard this morning. On Morocco, this is now Women's World Cup. Morocco joined South Africa and Nigeria in last 16. The North Africans made history by reaching knockout stage on their World Cup debut. Two-time champs Germany knocked out after draw with South Korea. Also, English Premier League, injured Jesus to miss start of EPL season. Arsenal striker Gabriel Jesus has had minor knee surgery and will miss the start of the Premier League season. Jesus did not play in Wednesday's preseason win over Monaco, and manager Mikel Arteta confirmed afterwards that the Brazil forward will be out for a few weeks after a little procedure. With that story of English Premier League, we come to the end of today's morning momentum this amazing Friday. And as we leave, we want to leave you with one message. The weekend is here. Please don't drink and drive, party safely. I want to thank all of you for choosing to stay with us amid this broadcast. And also many thanks to those who have made this broadcast a success. Anifa, Kavira, the chief controller, and John Kariuki behind the cameras. See you on Monday, same time, same place. Until then, do have a beautiful Friday.